Christopher Pyne, as you almost certainly know, is a former Liberal Cabinet Minister. Bill Shorten is a former Labor leader and went to the 2019 election promising to change negative gearing. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you back. Now, I'm going to start with Christopher Pyne because we're happy to see that you are back from Nero's Rome, relatively unscathed, I think.
Yes.
This week was actually, before we come to negative gearing, Australia's beautiful obsession, this week was obviously kicked off by with the campaign launches, oddly on the same day, and housing policies from both sides, as we just tried to discuss. Do you think that either of those major policies, do you think, Christopher, that they had cut through, appearing as they did on the launches on the same day and the policies in contest at the same time?
Well, I think, Sarah, this is the first week where the elections actually started to get a grip on the psyche of the Australian public, to start to get some interest, as we just saw with Michael Sukkar and Claire O'Neill. They were very passionate. They weren't nearly as friendly as Bill and I have been the last few weeks, but at least they were passionate about something and they were arguing. So the rail lines are now crossing, and the first 2 weeks the rail lines weren't crossing, but they now seem to be in a real contest. Both leaders had tricky weeks. Anthony Albanese was contradicted by Jim Chalmers over the modelling of negative gearing and capital gains tax, and of course Peter Dutton had to admit that he made a mistake over the Russian potential air bases in Papua. But at least the public is seeing a bit of fire and brimstone, which I think for the first couple of weeks they weren't.
Now, Bill Shorten, obviously we have to bring you in here. We have to say these two phrases together, Bill Shorten and negative gearing. It turned out to be the third rail of Australian politics. When you see the debate come round again, what's your advice to Anthony Albanese when this beast raises its head during a campaign?
Well, first of all, keep using Claire O'Neill. I thought she was outstanding and passionate. That's what people want to see in their politicians. In terms of negative gearing, that's not why we lost 2019, but Anthony's ruled it out. You know, I think if the best the Libs have got is trying to play gotcha moments about Treasury modelling, then the Liberal campaign is drowning, not waving. I actually think that Labor's housing policy... Chris said that this is the first week where the campaign's got traction. I actually think what's happening is this is the last week for Peter Dutton to try and get any traction. You know, my sources say that the Libs are tanking in Victoria, the fact that the Prime Minister was in Bonner. I even think in Sturt, which Christopher Pyne would never have lost, because it's one of the top 20 seats in Australia of public servants. I think Mr Dutton's frolic on working from home or not working from home and public service cuts. No, I think that the Liberal campaign is drowning, not waving. And as for the Russian scare, I mean, the ghost of Robert Menzies would be horrified. I can hear the chains rattling that the Liberals can't even run a Russian scare campaign anymore. Wouldn't have happened in your day, Chris.
Now, I just have to ask you this, Bill Shorten. When you hear the phrase negative gearing in relation to a campaign, do you still flinch?
No. Listen, the government's made clear they're not going to introduce it. In terms of the policies we took in 2016 and 2019, I thought they were valid then, but the reality is that Labor's moved on from that and is looking at other strategies for housing. I mean, let's cut to the quick. The Liberals are undercooked in this campaign. They've relied on grievance for the last 3 years. You've got the Trump bump, the shadow of Trump upsetting people, and I'm afraid that, you know, the Libs are desperately... What's the scare campaign for tomorrow? That the big issue salespeople are all going to be anti-negative gearing?
I think they'll be sticking with negative gearing, Bill, because negative gearing is the third rail of Australian politics. I don't think they'll be getting off Anthony saying on the leaders' debate that the government hadn't modelled or commissioned negative gearing or capital gains tax changes when they clearly, Jim Chalmers has said today that they did. And I think this is the first time that Anthony's been really tripped up.
I'm one of your biggest fans, Chris, but to quote an American politician, that dog won't hunt. You know, the truth of them. It's just...
Chris, just tell me...
a bundle of gun dogs and it wouldn't catch.
Chris Pyne, I'd like you to answer that, actually, because the way, obviously, that Peter Dutton presented this is that it suggests that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was being dishonest. Does any of this reach the voters? What do you think, Christopher Pyne?
Well, I think the leaders' debates and the launches and the housing policies have given the public a reason to sit up and think, now, who is going to be best for me, cost of living wise, housing crisis, etc. And they're seeing a bit of disagreement between Anthony and Peter, which I think is what election campaigns should be all about, to get the blood running. And I think that's happening now. So I think this week has been an important reset for Peter Dutton. He certainly started the week behind. I think the first two weeks of the campaign haven't been great for the coalition, but 3 weeks is a long time in politics. Most state elections are only 3 weeks in total. The federal election's 5 weeks, as Bill would remember. He was so exhausted by the end of 2019, he started drawing beers on the Saturday of election day. He couldn't wait for it to be over. He was completely worn out. So I think that the voters are very excited about this week, and I think it's going to start being good for the coalition.
And whoever's running the coalition scare campaigns, they're about as scary as a Scooby-Doo cartoon, you know.
I found those pretty scary when I was, depending how old I was.
Yes, but you've grown up now.
I didn't realise.
Christopher Pyne, I want to come back to you for a minute, because before the election got underway, we heard a lot from the coalition about the importance of returning to fiscal rectitude, that they weren't going to be giving out sugar hits or Panadol, I think was the phrase that Peter Dutton used. The election has since turned into a bit of a spendathon. Does that mean that the mantle of better economic managers has to be kept in the pocket for the time that all of these huge announcements are being made?
The phrase fiscal rectitude has always been a real favourite of politicians, has got to be said. But
yes.
I'm not sure the Australian public are necessarily bought onto it. I think that the coalition's economic credentials on being smaller government, lower tax, balanced budgets is pretty baked in the same way as everyone thinks Labor will spend more money on health and education is baked in. I think they're all givens. I think what's been interesting this week is no attempt on either side in the housing policy to address the real problem for housing, which is the supply of housing, the supply of workers to build that housing. But if you look at around the states and the Commonwealth, governments don't seem to get a big tick for being for spending less money. I mean, look at the Queensland state government, the Victorian state government. The fact that they have mountains of debt doesn't seem to have been the reason that either of them have struggled, or Queensland lost and now Victoria is looking very shaky. So the days when people used to give A pluses to the Howard and Costello era for fiscal rectitude, they don't seem to be elevated as much as they were.
Now, just before we go, I'm going to go back to Bill Shorten, because it's possible that we could say that Trump's voice was less piercing during the campaign this week. But then Jacinta Nampijinpa Price took us back to MAGA Town by saying that she wanted to make Australia great again. They seem to be determined, Bill Shorten, to keep Donald Trump alive in this campaign.
Listen, Jacinta Price is obviously a woman who is very capable, but the fact that she inadvertently, or for whatever reason, threw her leader under the bus with the MAGA paraphernalia, the Make America Great stuff, what candidates should do is support their leader. At the end of the day, Peter Dutton's reputation is important, but when he couldn't be seen, when he had to choose between Jacinta Price and her MAGA views or distancing himself from them, at a time when Peter Dutton desperately needs to distance himself from some of the Trump policies, you know, I think it was one of those times where, again, the Liberal Party machine doesn't seem to be united or focused. I mean, and just one little footnote to Christopher, Jim Chalmers has brought down 2 surplus budgets. That's sort of pretty good.
All right, but, you two. I'd love to carry on, but we're certainly into the true heart of the campaign. I look forward to speaking to you both next week. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Cheerio.